You're listening to Boobies and Newbies, brought to you by the Frolic Podcast Network. Welcome to Boobies and Newbies, the podcast that asks novice romance readers to think outside the dick in a box and brave the unbridled world of erotica. I'm your host, Kelly Reynolds, and I hope you're ready for another Bite Me romance as part of our Cocktober lineup of episodes. As always, you can catch up on past episodes of Boobies and Newbies on your favorite podcatcher or on boobiesandnewbies.com. Reviews on Apple Podcasts are always appreciated. And if you really want to show the podcast a little extra love, please come on over to patreon.com. I've got a lot of fun stuff coming up for the holidays, including Patreon exclusive holiday presents. So there's never been a better time to join the fun. But in the meantime, let's talk werewolves. My guest today is no stranger to the podcasting world. In fact, he recently celebrated the 400th episode of his podcast, Victims and Villains, which just so happens to be a personal favorite of mine that I've also had the pleasure of guesting on multiple times. This weekend, you can listen to Boobies and Newbies, as well as a whole slew of other podcasters during Horrific Hope, a 48-hour live stream event dedicated towards bringing awareness to mental health and suicide prevention. More on that later, but please first join me in welcoming my guest, Josh Burkey, aka Captain Nostalgia.
What is up, Boobies and Newbies?
Oh, what is up? I mean, here we are, another October, another Mean Girls Day passed, a special day that will always not only remind me of the movie that we both love so much, but of the time that we recorded an entire podcast about Mean Girls.
Yeah, we've had some interesting collaborations, whether it's been Mean Girls or Showgirls, which still to this day, and of all the 5 years I've done podcasting, the legacy of Nomi Malone remains one of my favorite podcast episodes to have recorded. And it was such a pleasure to do it with you.
It was a delight. And also, it made me look at the movie Showgirls in a whole new light. Like, if anybody listening has not seen Showgirls, you are doing yourself and the world a disservice. So please watch that. But also, the key is to watch Showgirls, then to read You Don't Know Me. Is that the name of the book?
No, it's
Showgirls. It Doesn't Suck.
Yeah, It Doesn't Suck,
book, right?
Showgirls is by Adam Naiman. It's a really simple read. I think it's like 140 pages.
Yeah, it's actually part of this, it's not an anthology, but it's like a series of books published about pop culture that I was actually like looking at the other night because guess what they're putting one out on? Jennifer's Body. That's right. And so... But we read the book, we watched Showgirls, and then we watched You Don't Know Me, the incredible documentary about Showgirls. And I swear, if you read that book, watch that documentary, and then you watch Showgirls again, you will have like this brand new perspective about that gem of a film that, oh gosh, it was so fun. And that's what I love about when things come out that kind of just give us like a brand new fresh pair of eyes on something that maybe we had already formed an opinion about, but like then we can like look back, think about things a little bit differently, and maybe change our opinion a little bit about them.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And since I actually watched the Nomi movie as part of its press run originally, and then I picked up the book and watched the movie and was like pitched to the idea on doing an episode, and that movie, particularly Showgirls, has become like a yearly staple now, that it's like it's kind of like found its way to sit us alongside like Halloween and The Shining, that I just like it's one of like probably 10 movies I watch every year, just because, you know, who doesn't love different places.
Different places. Well, and I know that you weren't as much of a fan of it, but you also pointed me in the direction of like a parody musical of Showgirls that's on, there are some tracks of it on YouTube, and I gotta say, I freaking love it. So it's not for everyone. However, I am a fan. I am a huge fan. I would love to see that show on stage.
Oh, like I'm not a fan of like the musical numbers that are in it, but I feel like so like Dear Evan Hansen's a great example too. Like I ended up like listening to the soundtrack to that prior to seeing the movie. And I was like, these tunes out of context don't really work for me. But when you see them in their context, I think that I would have a greater appreciation. So that's kind of why I still hold out hope that, maybe they'll release a DVD or a Blu-ray or like, whatever version of the stage production, or maybe just decide that they're going to resurrect it because, we're coming up on the 30th anniversary within the next couple of years. So why not?
There you go. Well, and as we know, there is a massive cult following of Showgirls. So I would not be surprised. If it's not the 30th anniversary, it'll be the 35th. Like, there will be the renaissance of Nomi Malone, which I am perfectly okay with.
Yeah, she's finally going to get her 15 minutes of fame that she well deserves. Seeing Showgirls on the big screen, too, is also one of my, 5-year goals as far as, like, personal goes, like, because there was a theater that did it back in July, and I couldn't get off work to go see it. I was so bummed.
It'll happen. I mean, maybe that'll just have to be like a special victims and villains event. Like because I don't know. I might fly to the East Coast specifically for that event, should it happen.
I mean, we are right now talking about goals, and film festivals are among those goals. So
there you go.
I would love to have Nomi kick it off.
That's something perfect segue into what I wanted to ask you about too, which is the fact that you're 400 episodes into Victims and Villains, which is, first of all, I mean, congratulations, incredible. You've got the podcast, you've got the nonprofit, you're providing people with suicide prevention resources and connecting through, I'm hitting my microphone, connecting through conversations about pop culture. It's a massive milestone. And then now we have the Horrific Hope stream coming up. I made that sound like one word, like Horrific Hope stream. Horrific Hope, a live stream, is coming up this weekend. So you've done a lot with the first 400 plus episodes of this show, and I'd love to know what's next. Like, what else is on your list of goals?
Oh, jeez. I mean, that's not to say that like 400 is just of the Victims and Villains. That doesn't include That's High Praise, which is a Nicolas Cage spinoff we've done recently. Abyss Gazing, a horror podcast, which is also a spinoff.
Yeah.
Press interviews, Twitch streaming, YouTube. Right now, like, we're just trying to really grow, and kind of one of our big things from this year moving forward has been to not only get new guests that we've never been on our show, but to create legitimate relationships with creators and humanize them as people. Because I think that sometimes it's really easy to see creators and be like, oh man, like, I love the content you do, but I also want to have people on the show that we're not just here to talk about something that you're doing, but something that you're equally passionate about, and where that passion sparks conversations of mental health, awareness, and suicide prevention, like we're doing right now. I think means a lot to me, and I think that there are so many stories out there that have yet to be told through that lens that we want to deconstruct them. And you look at things like we've done over the years, whether it's been Jennifer's Body or Showgirls and Mean Girls and Oklahoma.
I was going to say, don't you dare forget Oklahoma. Oklahoma's in there too.
Yeah, and so like it's been really interesting, and Horrific Hope is kind of the first step that we're taking towards doing those, not only that relational approach, but also the what am I trying to say? The film festival route, because
Yeah.
Friday through Sunday, Friday night at 10 p.m. to midnight, Saturday night at 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I should also mention. And then Sunday morning, midnight to 2 a.m., and then 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. We're going to be doing blocks of short films that people that are watching the festival or the stream can actually engage and kind of see. And they're also providing links to where you guys can check out other things, and it's I'm really proud of it, honestly, because it's been something I've been wanting to do for a while now and haven't quite had a platform. And when COVID kind of transformed the world into like a digital space, it
Yeah.
seems like the right opportunity to kind of start doing that. And I think a lot of a lot of the filmmakers that we're working with are not only telling stories that really embody the values that we're doing, but also at the same time are really behind the mission of what Victims and Villains is. And this specific stream is to not only remind people that there are people out here willing to have these conversations, that there are resources readily available, but it's also helping to fundraise to get these source these actual resources into conventions, film festivals, churches, and we're hoping soon to be able to bring these to after school programs as
Oh,
well.
good. I love that. No, this is, I mean, it's a great step. And like you said, if nothing else, I think there's something about the last year and a half with the pandemic where it's funny to say, like, I feel like a part of it brought people together a little bit more, because obviously physically it distanced us, but I do think that when people kind of had limited access to seeing people in person the last year or so, they did rely on connections that they were making, like on the internet. And whether it was through social media or a podcast you listen to or a, group that you're a part of. And the uptick in like live streams and film festival programming virtually, I think has been a fantastic way to like stay connected while still creating art, while still creating room for discussions. And my hope is that even as the world opens again and we get back into like in-person programming, which of course I am very excited to go to events again. I'm a filmmaker myself. I want to go to film festivals. I also still want to see this virtual programming continue at the same time, because I mean, I can just speak from my own personal experience, like the amount of romance panels that have come out in the last year that I never would have been able to attend in person had they taken place at a bookstore in Chicago or a bookstore in New York. That I can hop from one to another with the click of a button has been so fantastic and connected me with so many new authors to check out and so many new bookstores to buy books from. So as much as I want the world to open and to go to these in-person events again, I really do hope that the virtual programming does continue, that we do still have a space for that as well, because it does not have to be either or.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. That's kind of one of the things that, as the time of recording this, like I'm also doing coverage for Salem Horror Fest, which is a film festival that's going on all month long in Salem, Massachusetts. And honestly, it's been one of those things that like I'm fortunate about. Like the beginning of this year, I ended up actually being able to cover a film festival out of Berlin.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
and like see what international artists are doing during this time of pandemic. And like you said, like I didn't have that luxury before. And in some weird way, like I've been able to connect to people that I normally wouldn't have connected to, and
Yeah.
honestly really like that. I like, I don't get me wrong, like I love, there's nothing beats being able to see something on like a big screen, or to share a coffee in person
Sure.
with someone. But also at the same time, you have events and things like that have gone, the digital route and have been able to reach so much more people and so many more outlets
Mm-hmm.
share with their art and, do even things like what we're doing right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I mean, I should preface this by saying I've appeared on Victims and Villains several times. You've been on Boobies and Newbies before, and Josh and I have never had the honor of meeting in person. So, I mean,
It's a dang shame.
But this is the world, and honestly, this is one of the things I'm so thankful about. I'm so thankful for, both with podcasting as well as just like the book sphere that I consider myself a part of. It are the connections to people I've met and friends that I've made, who I do consider friends. I feel like a lot of times people use the term like internet friends, like these are my internet friends, and I'm like, they're my friends. These are people that, even though we haven't met in person, I still consider friends. I would call a friend whether I was by their side or, on Twitter. So, one of these days, though, it's going to happen in person. We are going to talk about movies, and we're going to watch Showgirls on the big screen, and it is going to be amazing.
Yes, I think now I have attainable goals to reach. So it's like, oh, we'll bring you in as our guest of honor. We'll have you do like a Showgirls panel afterwards.
Fine. Oh my gosh, that would be everything. And can you imagine if like Gina Gershon was there? Like that would just be the chef's kiss on top of everything.
I recently saw her in something, and she is aged fairly well.
Yes.
And also too, like it's very weird because like I can't separate her from Crystal Connors now. I can't do it.
I mean, once you play an iconic role like that, I'm sure it's very hard for most people to know you as anything other than that role. So I completely understand. Well, I hope everybody checks out the live stream this weekend. And in the meantime, where can everybody find and follow Victims and Villains?
Sure. So much like you, we can be found wherever you guys get your podcasts from. It's just search Victims and Villains on all major platforms and indie ones as well. You guys can follow us. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and Twitch is also where the stream is going to be happening this weekend. And then we're also on Patreon where you guys can partner with us to get mental health resources into events and, like I said, hopefully schools.
Yeah, I hope so. I do hope so. My mom's a recently retired middle school teacher, and I can say that that's something that's a part of discussions at a much earlier age nowadays in schools than it was when we were in school. And so it's something that I do think is necessary that people are talking about and have the resources for that. And I'm thankful that we have organizations like Victims and Villains to be able to do that. So give them your money and make it happen, people.
Yeah, because honestly, like the more support that we can have, the greater impact we have. Because like right now, like we're able to impact our greater Richmond area where our offices are, and we've been able to travel and do some things that are like within 3 to 4 hours. But helping us and partnering with us can take us further global. Yes. I mean, not that we can't do that already with podcasts, but
right.
Being able to have a conversation and being able to hand someone else like a specific resources that is pertaining to exactly what they're going for is just a life-changing miracle, honestly, that we are trying to and hoping to plant here soon.
Yeah. Well, I know it'll happen. And thankfully, there's a lot of great people out there who are willing to support an awesome cause like this. And I will for sure put a link in our show notes for today so people have direct access to Victims and Villains. But in the meantime, let's talk about some wolfish romance. And so
if we must.
Now, today's book is Scarlett and the Wolf by Lorelei Johnson. And this paranormal paranormal, wow, words. This paranormal romance was published in October 2020. It's available on Amazon for free if you have Kindle Unlimited. And it's also the second book in Lorelei Johnson's Tantalizing Tales collection. Mind you, there are 7 books in this collection, all of which are adaptations and reinterpretations of classic fairy tales. So this was a first for me. I haven't read any of the other books in the series, but I know that I, just at first glance spied like a Cinderella story. I think there's also there was one with a Piper in the title, so I'm like, is that like Peter Piper? Like I'm not sure, but there are a few more if you're craving some shorter, spooky paranormal reads that also happen to have a little dose of fairy tale in them. She's got 7 for you to choose from. So I was looking back on the episode that Josh and I had previously recorded, which was a 12 Days of Boobsmas episode back in 2019, I think. And that was the Earl's Christmas Pearl. So it occurred to me that you've probably only read holiday-ish romances at this point. You've had a Christmas historical romance and a Halloween-y paranormal romance, unless you've been holding out on me and reading romance on your own.
No, I just kind of look for like my invitation to come back at once like the year mark comes around. So like I was like, I'm pretty sure she forgot my address for the 2020 appearance.
Oh no.
But the 2021, I was just like, yeah, I'll come back and do it. And what better way to do it than Halloween?
Yes.
I never ever thought that I would say that something is better than the Earl book that we read, but I don't want to show my
Ooh, save it. Yeah, let's wait because
I
don't
want to show my hand too early.
That's going to be something I want to know too. Is judging by your 2 experiences with romance novels, like how they measure up against each other. And I will say, Josh, while we're not reviewing them for the podcast this month, although I do have plans to do it at some point in the future, I think as a movie fan, and we were just talking horror movies before we started this podcast, I think you would really want to check out the many monster-themed eroticas and romance novels that have come out in recent months. It has become a very hot trend in the romance world. And so if you're craving ogres, if you're craving Mothmen or swamp people, like, let me tell you, the amount of monster erotica that is currently in existence is incredible.
I mean, not to belittle the genre, you said ogres, and
yes,
I honestly just am like thinking of fan fiction with Shrek.
Okay. Yeah, I was gonna say, like, are you picturing Shrek? Because I
yes.
am. But
I had a little bit of a chuckle at that. No, I'm willing to try things, try new things when it comes to like mediums like books and stuff like that. And, I think that not everyone's going to, it's going to hit everyone. And like,
sure.
I wrote this when I did my review for Goodreads, I was like, so like I'm probably not the audience for this, and that's okay. I will perhaps check it out.
Let me give everyone the synopsis I've got for this book, and this is straight from goodreads.com, so that way everybody can catch up, and then we will dive right into our discussion. So this is once again Scarlett and the Wolf by Lorelei Johnson. Scarlett has never felt like she belonged, except when she visits her grandmother. When she visits this time, she discovers that her grandmother has been kidnapped by the Huntsman, and there was a lot more to the old woman than meets the eye. Branden is a werewolf. I gotta say, first of all, I was not expecting like a character named Branden in this like otherworldly kind of paranoid. I don't know. That's just not like the
it's
name.
It's kind of a proper name. Yeah, it doesn't really fit.
Branden. Like, yeah, Branden is a werewolf. And there's something about him that draws her in, an undeniable attraction like she has never known. but their relationship is forbidden. If he chooses her, he forsakes his pack and everything he has ever known. Oh, excuse me. The clock is ticking. Can they stop the Huntsman before it's too late? Their lives and their love depend on it.
Dun,
okay. Dun. Scarlett and Branden. Here we go. Well, Josh, I'll turn it over to you. Initial impressions.
I like when authors will interpret classic fables and fairy tales and bring it into their own interpretation.
I do too.
And it's kind of, there are moments in this that I genuinely liked. Mm-hmm. And then there are moments, as we'll get into later, that I genuinely didn't like for reasons that I will explain when we get to that portion. But I think the thing that bugs me about this book the most is the ending. And the epilogue, goes into what I was going to say, because the ending prior to the epilogue is really sweet.
Yeah.
Like, I was so surprised by like how connected I felt to those to the relationship dynamic between Scarlett and her grandmother, and kind of like this like revelation of like heritage and history. And then they're like, well, we're gonna throw that heartfelt thing out the way. Yeah. So that's my it's my 2 cents.
Okay. Well, yeah, let's focus on maybe the things that we did like about the story to start with. And so I'm with you. I love a good reinterpretation of like a classic story, whether it's adapting it to be like a contemporary take or it's just like a nice twist on it. Like in this one, I liked the fact that Scarlett is very much Little Red Riding Hood. Like, I mean, if you've seen the cover of the book, you see her in her red or scarlet hooded cloak. Go figure. It's like whenever I read a Christmas or holiday themed romance and the character's name is like Jenny Holiday or Noel Christmas, I'm just like, okay, Scarlett, I get it. Red, Little Red Riding. Got it. Perfect. So what I did like is that she's given this cloak by her grandmother when she's a kid, and she's told, you have to wear this. You have to wear this all the time when you're out. It'll protect you. And I didn't really think anything of it at first. I thought like, oh, maybe this is like a magical like wolf repellent coat. I don't know. But later on we do find out that it is a magical cloak that is designed to suppress her, like, the only way I can think of it is like suppress her wolf hormones, because she is a wolf. She's part wolf, and she doesn't shift because she wears this cloak, which, you know, I can buy into the lore, sure. So I liked that kind of spin on Red Riding Hood, is like Red Riding Hood being like one of the wolves herself. I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that it really was a nice, unique touch to really bring in your own spin on that, because we've seen these characters done multiple different ways, right, and you need something new. If you're going to, you know, run back to the well that these stories come from, you need something that's going to set your book apart. And I think that making her part wolf is a really great way to do that. And I really enjoyed that spin of it, because it gives the book much needed depth, because her entire arc throughout the course of this is not only trying to find her grandmother, but it's also at the same time trying to find her own identity and who she is, because she doesn't really understand who she is. And also you have Branden, that he's not really sure as to why he's attracted to her, and kind of like the wolf conflicts as well in politics in here is also something that's really fascinating, that I think
I agree
does it really well. but the I can't remember Branden's comrade's name.
Oh, yeah, I can't either.
Starts with like a C.
I did like him though. I kept thinking like I wish this was a series where he got a book too because I liked him.
Yeah, he provided some like much needed like grounding for the Branden character because
Yeah.
I think that when sometimes you get into these like types of stories or even in real life, like you're kind of like love at first sight's a real thing.
Mhm.
And so sometimes you kind of think with your genitals and you need that bro or that broette that is gonna kind of like calm that fire down and like actually, you know, bring it back down
The
off of
voice
cloud
of
nine and
reason.
voice of reason.
Yes.
Yeah. And I
Cameron.
think
Cameron is his
Cameron,
name.
I thought that's what his name was. And I was like, that doesn't sound right.
It's right up there
But
with
yeah,
Branden.
I, I really liked him. I thought that he was I thought he was a great addition to the story.
Yeah, I did too. And this is it's a small cast of characters in general. We've got like
For sure.
Scarlett, Branden, and Cameron together for most of the book on this adventure. And then we have the grandmother character who we are like seeking. And then we have, the evil, dastardly Huntsman. Yeah, I know. I picture him like twirling a mustache. Like very, very evil cartoon character like. But that's pretty much it as far as like the characters go. I did really like hearing about, and this is one of my favorite things. I don't read a lot of paranormal romance, but when I do, I always want to know what are the rules? Like, what are the rules in this specific realm or world? Because that's one of the coolest things about paranormal romance or setting a book in a world different from our own is like you get to make up all the rules. Like you get to say how these creatures live their lives. And so I really liked the way that this specific group of wolves like live their lives because they're very feminist. So I loved that there's even a line I marked where they basically say like just sort of like how things go in their society, but they say something like oh, here it is. This is actually in the epilogue. So spoiler, Branden had insisted on having the joining ceremony as soon as possible. It was sort of like a human wedding, except their gods didn't frown upon women enjoying the same liberties as men did, which was refreshing. And I was like, oh, that is refreshing because there's even a moment between Scarlett and the Huntsman where she basically criticizes the rules that men have created because they're specifically to like suppress women in their society. And I was like, ooh, okay, we're like tackling some very contemporary issues in this book that takes place in another world, which is great. I mean, I like that. So that was something that I did like was just sort of like the establishment of like how these werewolves live and then also what the rules are and like what they worship, like what drives them. I thought that was good.
It's one of my biggest complaints about revisiting some older movies or like different time periods where they take place because like, I'm looking at things through like a 2021 lens.
Right.
And as we've mentioned before, like I love horror, and one of my favorite films to revisit is The Invisible Man, like the original one from the 30s. And my only complaint about that movie is how the women character are portrayed. And so when you have a film or when you have a book that is taking place in another universe, presumably around like the 19th or like early 20th century is kind of where I gathered it takes place. It's nice to have those contemporary touches in place because it makes the reveal of the Scarlett character being a werewolf, making her strong before you kind of realize the source of that strength. Like she's strong, she's a strong character and a strong woman prior to even the reveal that she has ties to be a werewolf. And I thought that was really interesting. And I love, like you said, like I love the kind of the feminist touch that the werewolves bring, that they really embrace women as equals in the society.
Yeah. I always think it's interesting too when I'm thinking of this because in both of the werewolf romances we've read thus far this month, neither of them specify a time or place, which I personally really appreciate. And I think they're both written very much with a feminist lens. And what I love about that is that it's just a great way to show like these parallels between like, these are contemporary issues we're talking about today that these characters who clearly are not living in like 2021 America, but like we don't know where and when they are. Like you were thinking like 18th, 19th century. I honestly had like no idea with this one, but there are so many things that they talk about both in this one and The Witch's Wolves, which was the other book we've talked about so far this month, that I was like, I know that this isn't here and now, but this isn't so distantly off when we're talking about things that are so much still relevant in our discussions today. I mean, like purity culture, like she's very, she's a virgin when the story begins, and that's something that we still, place emphasis on in society today, is like specifically for women. And so there was a lot that I was like, oh, this is still very much, there's so many like relevant discussions that can be had about like the topics in this book, even though it's only like 100 pages long, and even though we're talking about werewolves and Little Red Riding Hood.
Yes. And I guess for me, like I always equate like stories like Little Red Riding Hood to being kind of like that 18th, 19th century.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of always the way that like I view stories like that, like books I have read that are spins on this classic tale, or movies I've seen, even TV shows, like they always kind of take place in this like purity, like kind of like 1900s era. And I'm really glad that you brought up that emphasis for purity culture.
Yeah.
Growing up in a conservative Christian household, that movement that happened in the 90s was just something that really has damaged me even into my 30s.
Yeah.
And it's done a lot more harm than I feel like it did it good.
Right.
It's kind of like almost like what Dare was in the 80s, where you're like telling kids not to do drugs. And so then because you're creating a forbidden fruit now, and so you're telling kids not to have sex, and it's like, well, I want to have it. And I think even to an extent the book explores that notion, and that's really something that I really found captivating, was the exploration of purity culture. It will also be in my complaints department.
That's fine.
I think that the way that they handled kind of that exploration of purity and kind of like the temptations that come with that was a really strong win for this book.
Well, and if you think about it, like at the root of a lot of fairy tales and fables, including Little Red Riding Hood, the reason they were created was to be a sort of like lesson or moral learned. And most of the times those lessons were warnings. They were very much like, do not do this. Do not go into the woods. Do not go inside a witch's cabin. Like, there were so many things. Yes, a little more mustache twirling. That they, it's interesting to think of them that way, that you're taking like something that was initially meant to be like a warning, like do not do this, otherwise this will happen, and kind of like flip it on its head of like, well, if it did happen, maybe it could lead to romance. Maybe it could lead to a new happy ending. So in that regards, I do have a high respect for like anybody that takes on a fairy tale or a fable and just reimagines it, because I think they're so far removed from like what they're originally meant to be, that it's kind of a nice way to take those stories that had such gruesome endings and like really dark tales and give them a nice happily ever after spin on them, because that's the Disney way, right? But now I'm talking about like the adult Disney version.
Yeah, I feel like, and one of the things that makes this this book's particular take on purity culture so impactful is the way that you have the how society treats women, specifically Scarlett, and kind of like the emphasis on like her having to remain a virgin and remaining pure. And then on the flip side with Branden's character, you have Cameron that is being this voice of reason that's kind of really, talking about how uh you know oh well, in our society it's forbidden for wolves and humans to crossbreed. It's kind of like really
Right.
frowned upon. And so you have these two societal uh vantage points that kind of converge to the first time where the characters draw near to sex
Mm-hmm.
and kind of ultimately end up walking away from the situation. I think that, for as cheesy as that scene might be, it's well earned because you've established how what the societal rules are
Yeah.
and kind of the mindsets of these characters that are at the core of them, diving into to these rules and kind of how they've been impacted by them.
I agree. Well, and so since we're still on the topic of like the purity culture, I know that you've got some flip side like negative thoughts. This is a book where it's not that I have so like negative thoughts in general. I just didn't have a lot to say about this one after reading. Like, I'm thinking about, good for you, by the way, for already writing your Goodreads review, but I'm thinking about like the review that I want to write, and just, the first things that come to mind are like, it's a fun read. It's a great one for like Halloween. Is it one that I would necessarily go out of my way to recommend to somebody? I don't know, because there's nothing really to me that's like super stand out different about it, or so I'd love to hear just sort of like what were maybe the things that like didn't work for you so much.
I know you have a whole section dedicated to the sex scenes.
Ah, yes.
So do you want me to say my opinions on that here or in that section?
I mean, I'll let you choose. Like, if you have other things you want to start with besides the sex scenes, that's okay too.
Okay. All right. So I'll save the sex scenes for that particular section.
Okay.
I don't know. Like, for me, like the story, it moves so quickly, and we've talked about like the purity culture, the rules, how women are treated,
Yep.
the how the werewolves operate, and all of that comes so quick. This book never feels like it has room to breathe until you get to like the sex scenes. And I will talk specifically why they were not my favorite parts of this book in that section.
Okay.
But I feel like that was the only time that these books really got to ever slow down, and I feel like they weren't ever earned. They just felt so forced. And to me, I feel like whether it's a character that is going to fall in love and find the one that they're going to spend the rest of their lives with, or a character gets killed, and or whatever medium you're talking about, whatever genre, there has to be some sense of development. And I feel like these characters don't ever feel truly developed. Like, I can kind of make the argument for Branden and Cameron, but even they, like, that's a tough sell to stretch, because these characters just feel very one-dimensional.
Yeah, and it is interesting too that you say that you could make the case for Branden and Cameron, and Cameron, who's like a side supporting character who we maybe know just as much about as the two protagonists. So I definitely understand where you're coming from, and it did feel a little bit like exposition heavy. Like, we're getting a lot of the lore, handed to us in terms of through their dialogue and everything, which I think on the one hand, I do think it's difficult to efficiently world build in such a short amount of time. However, it's not impossible. It's difficult, but I don't think it's impossible to do it because I have read other novellas and I have, seen how much we can understand about, the world that they live in and the rules without necessarily having to like sit down and tell us. But more of just sort of like showing. I mean, it's the whole show not tell thing, right? Where it's the characters showing through their actions and the way that they respond to certain situations, how they were raised, what kind of world they live in, what their place is in that world, as opposed to simply telling us. So I do understand where you're coming from with the complaint that there isn't a lot of time to breathe. You're right. And I don't think sex scenes should be the time where we're breathing. I mean, I don't know if that's the moment where we should be like stepping back from the story to breathe, because at least for me, when I read sex scenes in romance, I want them to reveal something. I want them to have a purpose. And there are plenty of erotica and erotic stories that I love where the sole intention is to have this sexual exploration. It's not necessarily a part of a happily ever after story. It's about a moment. It's about an experience. And that's kind of the difference between romance and erotica. But I do want a purpose. I want there to be something that we're learning about the characters through these scenes. Usually it's about revealing some sort of insecurity or vulnerability. But I don't know if we get that in this one. I don't know if they feel like more than simply a sex scene for a sex scene's sake. Wow, that's a phrase.
Yeah, no. One of the things that in my viewing experience from someone that in the past has struggled in pornography addiction, that when it comes to like watching sex scenes in films or reading them in here, it's very easy for myself personally to kind of, be triggered or whatever. But probably like 4 or 5 years ago, my wife and I ended up like having these conversations about sex and media. And she said something that it's really struck me so profoundly that it's forever changed the way that I view sex in books and in movies, television shows, just whatever medium you're talking about. And that is, does the sexual exploration of these characters push the story forward?
Yeah.
Does it have purpose, like what you're saying? And it's 100% fine if it's going to. I'm not opposed to sex scenes as long as they are pushing the narrative forward. And here you talked about how the Johnson really crafts and is really good at world building, but not necessarily character development. And it definitely seems like she kind of has that vantage point of, I want to build up my world that these 7 books are going to take place in, and not necessarily fixate on the characters. And I think that shows in the treatment of the characters, the lore, and just how busy this book can feel from time to time.
I agree, and that's a great piece of advice for any writer out there, by the way, whether you're writing books, screenplays, whatever it might be, is that, I think everything should have a purpose in moving the story forward, or if it's not moving the story forward, it's moving the character development forward.
Sure.
Like there needs to be something happening. And I do think most writers, and especially romance writers, I've seen them have this discussion on panels. I've had this discussion with authors in interviews. I think most people would agree with that notion too. So yeah, I don't know if this one did that. And I feel like it's because it ends where it ends. It feels like the story's almost kind of like just getting started when the book ends. Like this was like a what do you call it? A prequel, like a precursor. Yeah. Like this was like the novella that came before the full-length novel sort of thing. That's sort of like the vibe I got, but I know that there's no novel that follows, which makes me very upset.
I can totally see that. And you're right. The way that this epilogue ends, it feels like it's setting stuff up that hasn't come to pass yet.
Yeah.
And even for this book, one of the things that really bothers me about being a film critic sometimes is I want to look at what's on screen, not necessarily what I want. And I'm going to kind of go against my better judgment for this book is saying that what could have made the sexual tension between Branden and Scarlett better used is if, like you had said, like if the characters had a specific purpose in having sex. And so maybe you have a sex scene in this book that is where the big reveal is, where she, unleashes herself as a werewolf for the first time. And that pushes the character forward in the identity aspect and also in the romance aspect that I feel like just kind of become background noise to a certain extent.
Yeah. Well, and what I was expecting, and I'm with you. I don't want to like rewrite the story or like by any means say like what it should have been. But what I was expecting at least was the fact that Branden is going through this dilemma of like, should I, mate this woman? I mean, that's the term we use in a lot of like paranormal romances, fated mates. Should I mate this woman knowing or at least thinking that she's human? And because of that, I'd be giving up my family, my legacy, like everybody that I've known my whole life. And thankfully we find out she is werewolf, so like they can mate and it'll be perfectly fine. Everybody will be happy. But to me, when you're talking about, I guess like the fated mate trope in like a love story, I would have almost expected him to kind of make the sacrifice of like, maybe they do have sex before he even knows whether or not she's a werewolf, because then he's made his choice. He's made his choice to be with her regardless of the outcome. And whether or not that means he has to give up what he's known, it doesn't matter because he has her now. Like, and so that's kind of where I thought it was going. Where, then the ending would have just sort of been like, oh, surprise, like she is werewolf, like everything's okay. So on the one hand, I was like a little disappointed that there wasn't more of like a choice made as far as like them consummating their relationship versus the choice being made for them by nature. Like the fact that she's a werewolf. Oh, well, now that we know, that decides that we can be together. Like I would much rather the characters decide to be together on their own.
Yeah, I would be down for that. I mean, at this point in this book, I found myself frustrated, so I would take a large portion of, whatever suggestions could make this story richer.
Well, let's talk about the sex then, because I think you have some things to say about that. First of all, was there a specific scene or excerpt, if you will, that you enjoyed, or do you just have shit to say?
I need to wipe my butt because I don't have anything nice to say about this portion.
Okay, let me see if I have anything nice to say.
For it.
I'm not sure. I definitely... What did I highlight? I always highlight a couple of things. You know what? The excerpt that I highlighted is actually the one from the epilogue when they're like finally together. And they've like, gotten married or whatever their version of married is. And it's, it's hot, I guess. I have to say, this is going to sound so silly, but this is like, I'm going to read you what to me is like the sexiest moment of the book. And everybody's going to be like, Kelly, what's wrong with you? But I will tell you, this is to me, I think this is the sexiest moment of the book. And this is at the end of chapter 12 when they've like rescued grandma and they've had like Branden had like silver on him and she's removing the silver from his body because if people aren't aware, silver like is like it like paralyzes werewolves. Like they can't fight silver. So she's obviously getting injured by like removing it from him, but because she's not like full werewolf, it doesn't hurt her like as badly as it's hurt like Branden and her grandmother. And I thought this moment was so fantastic. Branden turned his attention back to Scarlett, who had untied her grandmother. Her hands were burned from handling the silver chains. He took them in his own hands, pressing a kiss lightly to her injured palms. "You should have let me do that," he said softly. "I won't let you take all the pain," she said. If I can spare you, then I will." "I'm supposed to protect you." "Well, why can't I protect you too?" she asked, raising an eyebrow in challenge. And I was like, oh my God, that's so hot. That is so hot. I love that she is the one saving him. And if they had just rolled around on the floor right then and there, I would have loved it. But they don't, so that's okay. But there are a couple of sexier moments. Like there's the moment where they almost hook up. There's the moment where he does, she loses her virginity to him. And then there's a scene at the end, but nothing specifically memorable for me. So I will turn it over to you because I want the tea. Let's spill it.
Let's just say that like this epilogue feels so forced.
Yeah.
Like you said, like it feels like we're beginning to start something and then we just walk away. It's like kind of like watching a James Bond movie, hearing the villain talk about their grand plan to take over the world, and then the screen just goes black. Like,
and then it cuts to like 3 months later when like James Bond has foiled them.
Yeah, it's just like, well, what happened, man? Like I want to know a little bit more about this. Like, it's great that you guys got married. It's great that you found each other, and it's great that all of the issues that this book would plagued you, but it's just gonna be like, oh, this just feels very forced, and to me it puts an extra like sour taste in my mouth because of how much I truly liked the rescuing of like the grandmother and like how sweet that ending is. And then it's just like, oh, we're just gonna be raunchy for raunchy's sake, and it's like, no, bro, you gotta earn that, man.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings about this one because on the one hand, and I've already talked about this in at least one episode in like the last couple months, so I'm not going to dwell on it too much, but on the one hand, I'm just very, very sick and tired of reading the ending or the epilogue that has to involve marriage and babies. I'm really tired of it. Look, I love that so many people's love stories involve marriage and having children. That is absolutely fine. However, I'm tired of that being the go-to, of that being like the way to end every story.
Yeah, it feels like a tiresome trope by this point because, for as progressive as this book feels when you're talking about the use of feminism as a plot device, it feels like domestication completely deconstructs and like just feels like a last-ditch effort to kind of give them what they want, because like I've been married 7 years and I don't have any kids. I don't have any plans on kids, and I go into exorcism mode every time someone asks that question. So like, I am just going to enjoy the gift of sex for it being sex, like, and the intimacy that my wife and I have. And, had the story just kind of end it with, like, oh yes, like we're going to just, have sex for, this sex sake because, now we're married and consummated.
Yeah.
And, like, I would have been okay with that, with like the fact that like, A, you have to throw in children, B, you also at the same time have to uproot this like very just earned, very sweet ending. Like, I just can't get over that. Like, this book had a near perfect ending that was ruined by the like sex and I guess another issue that I had is the writing of the sex that takes place in here.
Okay.
And I mean, like I said, I'm extremely a novice when it comes to this kind of stuff. You dwarf me when it comes to my knowledge of sex, but in these types of books. But I don't know, like this just it felt like what I imagine an 8th grader who's never read a romance novel imagines how you write sex scenes.
Interesting. Okay, I definitely didn't have that thought, but at the same time, I didn't have like any specific thoughts about the sex scene. It felt, and I mean this not in like a negative way, but it felt like a run-of-the-mill kind of set. Like, I'm at the point where it's like, I want to read things that have some sort of lasting impression. I want to read something that matters to me, at least. It doesn't, and again, like we said at the beginning, everything is not going to be for everyone. That's perfectly okay. And I get that, especially when it comes to erotica, there might not be this happily ever after moment. There might not be, this perfect ending. I wouldn't consider this an erotica, though. I would consider this a romance. And what I loved about the ending before the epilogue is it literally ends with him saying, "Welcome home." And I thought that was really beautiful. I thought that was such a great moment to end on, especially when you're talking about a character's like journey of self-discovery and like finding the one family member that she has this connection with, her grandmother, and then also by discovering she's a wolf and falling in love, finding this whole other family and starting a new home with them. Like, to me, that is beautiful. Like, that is a story that I would remember. But I'm with you in that the epilogue does feel very tacked on. And I think, I could be wrong, I can't speak for the author, but I think too often authors are including epilogues as sort of like this last-ditch effort to appease the reader by thinking this is what they want. Like, I have to give them a very clear, tied in a bow, happily ever after, so you know everything worked out okay. And this is why I tend to prefer books that we say have a happily for now ending as opposed to a happily ever after, specifically because I feel like in most happily ever after endings, we're getting the same ending. It's just on repeat. It's whatever happened, wherever they came from, it's all okay because guess what? They got married and now she's pregnant. Like, it's until that narrative changes, until that's not the default mode, I'm going to still probably inherently not want to read epilogues because that's just what I'm being given. And so, and again, that's not everybody. That's not every author writing epilogues, but it does seem to be the default ending for a lot of romance, and I'm tired.
I would imagine so. But to your point about wanting to have something that's lasting, I think that's a commonality for people that are gamers, people that are podcasters, people that are cinephiles, people that are comic collectors, romance readers, whatever your specific niche is, you are turning to that fandom or medium of choice because you want to have a lasting impression. You want to talk about it with others and create community, because at the end of the day, that's really what we want, is we want other people to share in our passions with. And it's great when you can have it's great when I can just be wowed by absolutely how terrific the brand new Rob Zombie movie is, or trying to think of Britney Spears album is, just kind of show you my different variations of kind of like my spectrum of like where I'm at. But I also at the same time love sharing those experiences where I'm looking at indie art, whether I like it or not, like Scarlett and the Wolf. I think that, these are authors that and creators that need to be supported and have their voice heard.
Yeah.
And sometimes you're going to have a lasting impression and sometimes you're not. And for this particular one, I think that, like I said earlier, I think she does world building really well. I think that she does, use of like feminism really well and politics in this book. But when it came time for like the actual like sexual parts of it, like it fell real flat. Like it just seems like where did the writer go that was creating this very strong female character that's standing up to the Huntsman and also, kind of, using her feminine wiles to tease this werewolf who's already on the brink of breaking his code.
Right.
And I don't know, it seemed like they kind of like her character kind of crumbled in a way when it came to those kind of things. And yeah, I don't know, like the sexual parts of this book were among the worst for me.
Yeah, and I would say that, I have a background in screenwriting, and I feel like a lot of screenwriters will talk about like, well, are you a dialogue writer or are you an action description writer? Like a lot of people have their strengths, and so I've seen this discussed amongst romance authors, and I've pointed this out on the podcast before, like, oh, this person I think writes sex scenes like incredibly well, or this person I think writes really fantastic dialogue. I would agree with you in that I think the sex scenes are definitely the least enticing part about this book. I think they're definitely not where Lorelei Johnson excels in this story. And I don't know if I've read another Lorelei Johnson, so I can't speak to whether it's this book specifically or if she just happens to be a lot better at world building than, writing the steamier moments. So if anybody listening has, wants to weigh in on that, that's fantastic. I'd love to hear it. But this is something where it would make me intrigued and, dare I say, interested in reading something else from Lorelei Johnson, specifically just to see if maybe steamy scenes aren't necessarily her strongest point, or if this one just didn't connect. And then the other thing is it could just be us. It doesn't even necessarily have to be Lorelei Johnson.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely 100% fair. Like what hits for someone might not necessarily hit for others. And also too, like, as being a content creator myself, like there are definitely episodes of my podcast that like I'm not extremely proud of. And then there are other episodes of that I'm just like, if I have to like give you a nutshell, like why I'm passionate about podcasting, it would be listen to this episode or listen to this. And I think that same kind of goes for book writer or authors as well. You're going to have really high points. You're going to have really low points. And there is a chance to also say that maybe Scarlett and the Wolf is kind of a lower point for this author.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe in the 7-book series of the Tantalizing Tales, this was the one she's like, I just got to get Little Red Riding Hood out of the way so I can get to Cinderella. Like, fuck Little Red Riding Hood. Like, who knows? Like, we're not inside the author's head. We don't know their motivation. This is all speculation. But yeah, and like I said, there are probably, I'm sure, so many people who will enjoy this story. And there were a lot of things that I did really enjoy about this story. And I don't know. I think maybe for the month of October, maybe I will check out another one or two in the Tantalizing Tales. Especially, I did see there is a Little Mermaid themed one. And I have so many questions when it comes to mer people in general that I might be intrigued enough to read it.
You mean to tell me that I could have read a Little Mermaid knockoff?
It's there for you. I mean, I know that you use this podcast as your motivation to read romance.
Yes, I do.
But I'll tell you what, if you read it, we can talk about it in a Patreon exclusive discussion.
Challenge accepted.
Okay, well there you go. So something did come out of this episode. That's
I'm gonna log on to Kindle right now and
yeah,
get
and
it.
find it, right? So there you go. That'll be one more reason for people to join us on Patreon is to hear our take on Lorelei Johnson's version of The Little Mermaid, which I really, really hope does not end with anybody turning into sea foam, because that's how the original one goes, and I'm just not down with that. So
Yeah, The Little Mermaid has such
hoping.
an interesting history too, about why it was written, and well, when I read it,
Save it
yeah,
for the
I'll save it.
podcast.
Podcast. It's great, and it's random, useless, encyclopedic knowledge that no one asked for, but
Josh
that
has got.
I got. I spent way too much. I went through a kick where I just was like obsessed with The Little Mermaid. I had to know everything. So
We all have those
come
moments.
back to Patreon.
It was not Little Mermaid for me, but we all have those moments. So I'm intrigued. I want to know this knowledge, so I'm here for it. But let's wrap up by giving this book a few grades. And
Okay.
I feel like since the last time you were here, I probably have since changed the rating system, because I change it all the time because it
Probably.
never satisfies me. So in this time around, it probably still won't satisfy me, but we are rating for heart, humor, and heat on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the very best that it could possibly be, subjectively, of course. And so let's start with heart. What do you think? Because I think heart and heat will be easier to rate than humor in this book.
Does humor include the sex scenes?
I always like to think intentional humor as opposed to.
Okay, all right. So we're not looking at this like Tommy Wiseau. Okay. So for heart, I would probably go like a 6.
Okay.
I just really enjoyed like the character interactions. I think that they were done fairly well, and I think the ending with the grandma and kind of the welcome home notions,
Yeah.
just it put a really sweet bow tie, and I'm gonna bump it up to 6.5 talking about it. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I was thinking I actually might even give it a 7 for heart, because I think this one will be the highest rating for me. No, I know it'll be the highest rating for me for this one. Because for me, heart extends beyond the romantic relationship. It's a lot about the family and the friendships, and this is a book, that is about somebody trying to basically like find their place and who they are and how they relate to other people. And so for me, it's a 7 as far as heart goes. Humor, it might even be one of those ones where I would mark as like not applicable, just because I don't think this book was intended for laughs.
Yeah, I'm also gonna agree. I don't remember ever finding myself laughing intentionally at some parts.
No.
Or at any part, really.
And that's okay. I mean, we read plenty of books for this podcast that aren't uproarious, hilarious books, and that's perfectly fine. I love my romance across the emotional spectrum, so this just happens to not be like a super funny pick, and that's fine.
That's fine.
Okay, heat. This one will be a little challenging, I feel like, because I know that you're so not into the sex scenes that we were given. And I will say, if I remember correctly, we have like a hookup moment, we have her losing her virginity to him, and we have the sex scene in the epilogue. So I will say, as far as a novella goes, there is a variety and there are several steamy scenes. So I have to give it credit where it's due as far as that goes.
All right, if we're gonna distribute credit, I was gonna go in like the negatives.
Oh God!
But I'll go a solid 1.
Oh man! All right.
For heats, because like you said, like you got to give credit where credit's due.
Yeah.
It might not be written well, and it might feel awkward in certain places, but it's got a variety there, so I can't deny it that.
Yeah. No, for me, My general rule of thumb that I use for myself is that if there's sex on the page, meaning it's not a closed door romance, that we actually do get to read some explicit content, that it's at least a 5, which I know is not your rating scale, which is fine.
That's fine. That's fine.
I guess, I don't know. Part of me would even bump it up to a 6 just because there is more than one scene. But I think it's more of the quality of the scene that kind of keeps me wanting to keep it at a 5. I guess this would be one of those ones where I would tell people personal preference, it'd be more of like a 3 or a 4. But according to the scales of this podcast, it'd be like a 6.
You're so generous.
I'm just trying to be fair. I'm trying to be consistent. Like, it's definitely not my cup of tea as far as the sex scenes go. However, I think as far as like just giving a fair steam level based off of what I've given books in the past, it would be between a 5 and a 6. Because it's there. There is heat. Whether you like it or not, it is there on the page. So I have to at least acknowledge that.
That's fair. And like I said, like they do exist, and I will acknowledge the variety. It's just the style in which they were written.
Yes.
It's not written like terribly. Like I can, like, when I review films, like I can look at a movie and be like, I genuinely had fun with this, but it's not necessarily a good movie. Like, that's how I felt about the most recent Venom, is that while I can look at this and say that I had an absolute blast with this, it's not a perfect movie, but it's still a fun thing. And it's fun for these reasons. And I think that that's kind of where I landed with this in this terms of heat, is that I'm not a fan of this, but what really keeps it from being higher is the way in which they're written. So even if I'm not a fan of the scenes, it's the way in which the scenes are written and in the context that they're written in that really keep it as low as it is.
Yeah, I agree. And also, is there a new Venom movie?
Yeah, Venom, Let There Be Carnage.
Oh my God. Why do I know nothing about this? This is, I swear, I have not heard anything, although I do feel like I saw something about Venom on Twitter the other day, and I was like, why are people talking about Venom again? Didn't that come out like a few years ago? But I don't know. It didn't even occur to me that there was another movie.
Yeah, Venom, Let There Be Carnage. It has been out for, as of this recording, about 3 weeks.
Oh my God. So it's not even like in development. This is like out in the world.
Yes, it is.
Well, there you go. That just lets you know I've been living inside of my little cave. But right. Good to know. Good to know. Maybe one that I won't check out. I'll give it time.
It's an absolute blast. It's just far from perfect.
Okay. But seriously, thank you so much. And I hope everybody, not only gives Victims and Villains a follow, a listen, $1 or $2, but also, checks out the live stream happening Friday through Sunday this weekend. You can find Boobies and Newbies streaming on Friday evening. And then it just carries on throughout the weekend. So definitely check out Horrific Hope. I will be posting about it on our social medias. At this point, I already have posted about it on our social medias, but there will be plenty more posting happening. And join us this weekend and hang out and chat and listen. And I'm excited. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, this is the first time that we've ever had something like this. So I'm really excited, and I'm mostly excited to see what non-traditional horror shows or spooky shows do as terms of like that rule of like, oh, by the way, everything we're doing over the next 48 hours has to be spooky.
Oh yeah,
so
get ready.
Super excited.
It's going to be spooky, but it's also going to be sexy, at least when I'm streaming. So
who doesn't love spooky and sexy?
2 of my favorite things. Thanks so much for listening. Boobies and Newbies is part of the Frolic Podcast Network. Find more podcasts you'll love at frolic.media/podcasts. You can follow Boobies and Newbies on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Boobies Podcast.